Amongst the speakers are Minister of Labour Thulas Nxesi and Minister of Public Enterprises Pravin Gordhan. For more, we now cross live to our economics news senior reporter Mbongeni Muthwa. Mbongeni, a very good morning to you. Two major labour stories taking place this morning, the FEDUSA gathering and the CCMA this morning launching a new CCMA strategy in response to labour market challenges. Tell us about this.
Well, yes, it's quite a very important day, this, in terms of the labour environment in the country. Of course, these days talk is all around the public sector wage bill and government moves to reduce the growth of the public sector wage bill. So here we've got the first gathering of a labour federation to discuss exactly that, to prepare for the upcoming wage bargaining season, not only in the public sector but also in the private sector. FEDUSA, of course, is the second biggest federation in the country. They have about 24 affiliates. They only have 3 unions or union affiliates that are organizing in the public sector, but in terms of size they are quite big. They've got the Public Servants Association, which is neck and neck really with NEHAO being, of course, the biggest public sector union under the COSATU banner, and of course they also have HOSPESA under their stable, and another not well known public sector union. It's got an Afrikaans name, so it's for teachers, but they are the first ones to actually sit down and prepare for the upcoming negotiations, to formulate their wage demands. So we're going to get a first signal from this conference in terms of where they see the level of wage demands that they can make and possibly secure for their members, both in the public sector and in the private sector. In terms of the speakers here, like you mentioned, that there are going to be 2 ministers that are scheduled to speak. We've just learned that the Minister of Labour, Thulas Nxesi, is no longer coming to speak. He was scheduled to speak in about an hour from now on the successes and failures of the 2018 Job Summit. And apparently the minister has fallen ill, so he won't be coming anymore. But the Minister of SOEs, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, is still scheduled to come and speak here at around 12 o'clock. And I'm sure viewers will get a chance to see some of that speech live. He is scheduled to come and speak about the stage of SOEs. There's a lot, of course, going on at the moment around SOEs, SAA, possible retrenchments there, and many other SOEs, ESCOM as well. So it's a very important address that's going to be coming through. So basically for now, that's where things are at. This conference is scheduled to start in the next few minutes at around 10 o'clock, and then at around 12 we will get Minister Gordhan addressing the delegates here.
Mbongeni, it's an important conversation around preparations for the negotiation period. COSATU coming up last week to say that as opposed to the reported above inflation increases that are said to be the cause of this public sector wage bill that's heavy, it's actually the corruption that has been taking place in relation to public officials. How do we balance out this conversation? How do you think it'll be balanced out in this gathering?
Well, we have to look, of course, at the context of why unions are putting forward that argument. It's not only COSATU that's making that argument. Unions across the board in the public sector are making that argument. FEDUSA is making the same argument. NACTU as well, the other union federation, is also making the same argument in the context of the moves by the government to reopen the current wage agreement, the last leg of which, or the third year of which, is about to take effect from the beginning of next month, where the government signed on a dotted line agreeing to give public servants a 7% increase from April this year for the next coming financial year, which is starting next month. Government agreed to this way back in 2018 when they entered into a 3-year agreement with public sector unions. The times were different back then. It was totally different times to what we have at the moment in terms of the weak economy, in terms of the very bad shape of government finances, which is what has prompted the government to actually put a foot down and say we need to make savings, we need to make cuts. Moody's is expected to give a decision on the rating of the country at the end of this month. It's another issue that Moody's is going to be looking at, or is looking at quite strongly, in terms of government's seriousness about reducing spending against the background of very weak revenues for the government in terms of taxes and so on. In the budget, the government did not increase taxes. So the unions are very upset about this, that the government now seems, not that it seems, it actually wants to back out of the 2018 agreement where it agreed to increase wages by 7%. Now its government is moving towards increasing wages along or at the same level as the current inflation rate, which is at 4.5%. And so government is, the unions are saying that government is using workers as a scapegoat for the bad financial situation that it finds itself in, the need to balance the budget, and they are saying that government should be looking elsewhere to make the savings that it needs to make in order to balance the budget. It should be looking at recouping monies that have been lost from the fiscus to rampant corruption, as it has been shown excuse me, in the Zondo Commission, for instance. So the unions are making this argument. It's going to be a tough few weeks going to the end of the month to see actually what government does come 1st of April, whether government unilaterally decides not to implement the agreement and give workers 7% increase or not. But of course, the unions are actually opposed to that. In fact, no union would agree to that, because it would certainly lose members if a union were to agree to something like that.
Mbongeni, you were speaking about the different unions earlier. FEDUSA, the Federation of Unions of South Africa, hasn't been very vocal about the mooted public sector wage cut. Do we have a sense of how they hope to approach this? Are they planning to engage with government, or are they putting on an offensive?
Well, they were a bit slow off the blocks since the budget last week. Of course, I mean, from budget day, as soon as the announcement was made in Parliament by the Finance Minister about this move of trying to reopen the wage agreement, COSATU and SAFTU were first of the blocks and used very inflammatory language. In fact, saying that this is a declaration of war. FEDUSA has been not as vocal, but in preparation for this conference that they're having today, we spoke to them yesterday. The top leadership had a meeting yesterday. They spoke to us afterwards, and they came out also taking a very hard line, saying that in fact they have decided that they are going to declare a dispute with the government, which would be a first step really towards embarking on a public sector strike if they do that. Because if they do that at the Public Service Bargaining Council, then the CCMA would have to be brought in, and if no agreement is reached with the government on this, which really seems unlikely, then it would pave the way for FEDUSA to actually embark on strike in the public service. With their 3 affiliates there, although they are not small, but it's only 3 affiliates that we're talking about there. So it's basically sending a strong signal from their side to the workforce in public that they are also strongly opposed to what the government is trying to do here. They've also not ruled out taking the government to court over this issue. So they are taking a hard line as well. And also, there's of course, there's also union rivalry. Unions always want to cover their backs. No union wants to be accused by the rivals or the opposition of selling out the workers and their interests. So, which is why also you're seeing this very inflammatory language from, for instance, COSATU and SAFTU. Because now FEDUSA is, it seems like their strategy going forward from now on, and especially going into the next round of talks with the government, the fresh round of talks, which is which is due to begin in July. They are trying to paint COSATU as being in the pocket of the ruling party, because they're part of the alliance, of being in the pocket of the government, saying that COSATU leaders are not representing the interests of the workers properly, because they are eyeing positions in government, to become cabinet ministers. So it's quite interesting, all those dynamics, the competition, the rivalry. So it's all going to come to the fore strongly going forward from now on. But also coming out of this conference, we should expect FEDUSA to be more vocal in terms of expressing their opposition to what the government is trying to do in the public sector at the moment.
Mbongeni Muthwa, thank you so much for that very thoughtful analysis. And of course, it's related to the question we're asking you today. How do you see the public sector wage debate unfolding? Let us know at the agenda _SABC. Blaine?